Well, voters are also considering which presidential candidate has the best plan to grow the economy. Trump says he'll cut taxes and encourage businesses to invest and hire more in America, while Clinton plans on taxing the rich and increasing government spending. George Thomas has this look at the dueling plans.
Donald Trump is telling voters that he's the best candidate to grow the economy and create jobs.
I will tell you this, and I can say it with certainty. I will be the greatest jobs-producing president that God ever created.
Among Trump's proposals, slash corporate tax rates from 40% to 15%. Capital gains and dividend tax rates would go from 24% to 20%. Standard deductions increase from $6,300 to $25,000 and from $12,600 to $50,000 for single and joint filers respectively.
Well, there's no question that a lower tax burden is better for the economy, better for job creation.
Meanwhile, middle-income households would pay $2,700 less in taxes, and the number of those paying no income tax at all will rise from 77 million to 110 million. But some analysts like Dan Mitchell with the Cato Institute warn that the GOP candidate's tax plan could dramatically raise the country's debt burden.
If Trump has a giant multi-trillion-dollar tax cut and doesn't do anything to rein in the rapid growth of government spending, then there's no question that he'll probably give us a much, much bigger deficit.
But Trump does plan to prevent a big deficit by cutting government spending and helping the economy grow. Trump's Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton, is blasting Trump's ideas. Clinton calls it a huge bonanza for wealthy Americans.
Because Donald Trump's tax plan was written by a billionaire for billionaires.
Clinton says unlike Trump's proposal, she wants the rich to pay their fair share in taxes. Her ideas include those making over $1 million will pay a minimum of 30% of their income in taxes. People making over $5 million will get slapped with an additional 4% surcharge. Itemized deduction benefits will be capped at 28%. And she will limit the value of tax-deferred retirement accounts. Clinton claims that while the majority of Americans will see their taxes remain unchanged, her proposal will reduce the federal deficit by more than $1 trillion over the next 10 years.
Hillary Clinton says she's going to have the big tax increase, which on paper might seem to mean a smaller deficit, but then she also has all these programs for increased dependency on government, a bigger footprint for Washington and our economy. So in all likelihood, her plan would increase the deficit as well.
Even though the candidates are still finalizing their plans, what is clear is that both Republicans and Democrats say the economy is the #1 issue in this year's presidential election. Each candidate no doubt hopes their plan will in the end attract plenty of votes. George Thomas, CBN News.
Well, with us now from Washington is a leading conservative economist who's been advising Donald Trump on his tax plan, Stephen Moore. Steve's back with us again, and it's good to see you. Talk about pro-growth taxes. Is that the idea?
It sure is. And, you know, the main point here is that the economy just has not been growing. It's been growing, you know, at about 2% now for the last 6 years, which is a pretty anemic recovery. And by the way, for the last 6 months or so, it's been growing at less than 1%, Pat. So the economy, and especially for middle class workers, there's not been a pay raise now for 12, 15 years. And if you're going to bring the deficit down, you got to get the economy moving. You got to get businesses thriving. You got to get people back in jobs. If that happens, they'll pay more taxes. That's really the centerpiece of what Donald Trump is talking about. Here's an interesting thing, Pat. If you look at the Donald Trump tax reform plan, this would be the biggest tax reduction since Ronald Reagan ran for president in 1980.
Well, they called it Reaganomics, but it was enormously successful, and it gave us a period of several decades of growth. Would this Trump plan have some effect like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're exactly right that the Reagan tax cuts had an enormously positive impact on the economy. But I go back even further than that and talk about the JFK tax cuts. People forget that John F. Kennedy cut taxes as well in the 1960s, and we had a boom then. So we know the formula for creating growth. It's lower taxes on businesses and workers so that they have more resources. You know, I think the last time I was on your show, Pat, we talked about the fact that the United States now has the highest business tax rate in the world, and that is leading American companies like Burger King and Medtronic and Walgreens and Pfizer, some of our great companies, leaving the United States and going to Canada or China or in Ireland. If you bring that corporate rate down, as Mr. Trump wants to do, he wants to bring it from 35%, the highest in the world, down to 15%, which would be one of the lowest. I guarantee you, Pat, those jobs and those businesses will move back to the United States.
Have you done the math? You know, of course, they're talking about Hillary is just blowing smoke about, well, this is a tax cut for the rich, because that will help the middle class. But what about the deficit? Are there going to be enough? Is there going to be enough growth to overcome the deficit?
I think, first of all, if you look at the statistics, and these are not my statistics, these are the Congressional Budget Office, and they tell us that if we could increase the economic growth rate by 1 percentage point, with given how slowly we've been growing for the last 10 years, it's not that difficult to lift to get from 2% to, say, 3 or 4%. Every percentage point increase in growth lowers the deficit by $3 trillion over the next decade. So if you could go from 2 to 4% growth, and I think we can do that. We had 4% growth, as you just said, under Ronald Reagan. We had it in the 60s. Then you reduce the deficit by $6 trillion, Pat. So yeah, the answer to your question is absolutely yes. You grow the economy, you can bring the deficit down, and I guarantee you this, if we stay in this rut we're in right now, 1 or 2% growth, we're never going to bring this deficit down.
Well, you know, the Obama policies have really been death to the middle class. The middle class people haven't had an increase, in a sense, in real income in the last, period of time he's been in office.
And I think that is the key economic measure that people are going to be looking at in terms of who they vote for. You know, President Obama keeps running around the country saying, look at all the wonderful things I've done for the economy. I'm the Messiah. I've saved the country from a second Great Depression. And people are saying, you know, it really hasn't affected me. Almost half of Americans think we're still in a recession because, Pat, not only have their incomes not risen, for almost half of Americans, their incomes have actually declined. This is the first time we've had a recovery where middle-class people have not felt the recovery virtually at all. And yeah, we are creating jobs, by the way, Pat. I'll give President Obama credit. You know, the job growth has been pretty good. The problem has been the jobs we're creating are not the kind of high-paying jobs that we used to create. They're Walmart's jobs and they're McDonald's jobs, and you just can't. It's hard to raise a family with those kind of jobs.
Well, you know, this Obamacare has been an absolute disaster, and is Trump, like day one, going to repeal that if possible? I don't know if he can repeal it without an act of Congress, but will he move to do that?
Well, first of all, if I were President Trump, and I think he is going to be the next president, you know, the first day he is in office, the one thing he can do to improve the economy, and when you mention Obamacare, this reminded me of this. There are about 15 or 20 executive orders of President Obama's that he can rescind. He can just, with the stroke of a pen, rescind all of these executive orders that Obama has made, and that's going to improve the economy a lot. So, for example, this rule that says if you hire more than 50 workers, and I know you hire more than 50 workers there at CBN. Every single employee has to get Obamacare coverage. I can't tell you how many times I talk to small business owners around this country, the men and women who run our businesses, who say, I can't afford to hire a 50th worker because the costs are going to be so excessive. Now, we've got 15 million unemployed people in this country, Pat. Why would we pass a law that discourages businesses from hiring workers? I don't get it.
Well, another thing that he put in is a real killer. He just slipped this one in. It had to do with raising the standards for what were exempt employees and who gets time and a half. It used to be, I think, the platform was about $23,000. Now he wants to put it in at about $47,000 a year. And anybody who got less than that would be a non-exempt employee, and they would be at time and a half. So, I mean, it's going to be devastating to many small businesses.
It sure is. And, the thing about liberals is they're so generous with other people's money, aren't they, Pat? And, they're so willing to give away businesses' money. But look, if businesses aren't making money, then they can't pay their workers more. So, look, you cut me, I bleed red, white, and blue. I want American workers, Pat, to be the highest paid workers in the world. But the way you do that is create great businesses in this country and help employers. There's been an attitude, I've been in this town for a long time. There's been an attitude for at least the last 10 years that businesses are evil, that they're sinister. Well, look, as my old boss Dick Armey used to say, you knew Dick Armey, he used to say, without employers, you can't have jobs. Sometimes liberals can't make that connection.
Right. Well, how do you think this is coming out? Particularly it looks like the corporate tax is one that should get bipartisan support because this is ridiculous. It's not only 35% federal, you've also got the state taxes on top of that.
You got it. You're exactly right.
So
and now here, Pat, I just wanted to mention something about that business tax. We at the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute and other think tanks have done some really interesting research that shows when you cut the business tax, it's not the big wealthy people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates who benefit from that. You know who benefits the most from that, Pat? Middle class workers, because if businesses come back here with the jobs, workers make more money. It's a kind of a simple concept. So we find cutting the business tax is one of the best ways of helping middle class workers. If you look at the economic statistics today, what's most troubling to me, Pat, is businesses are not investing. They're not buying the computers. They're not hiring the workers. They're not building the new factories. And when you ask them why they're not doing it, because I've talked to a lot of these great businessmen and women, what they say is they're afraid. They're afraid of Washington. They're afraid to invest because they feel like, Washington's going to come after them with some new regulation or some new healthcare mandate. If you lift that veil of fear, I'm an optimist, Pat. I think this economy could grow at 4 or 5% for 5 or 6 years. And we could put, 1 million people to work per month if we did that kind of formula.
Well, let it be so. Steve, thank you so much. We appreciate you.